Hi. Okay. I'm Jason Bond, founder and managing partner of the Boole Microcap Fund, which is a hedge fund that uses quantitative value investing applying to microcap stocks. And I have to apologize, somehow I got very sick last night, so I've been having some trouble speaking. Apologies in advance if that slows down the presentation. So somehow there's a different slideshow here than the one that I had submitted. So, Peter Bernstein in Against the Gods said, "The evidence reveals repeated patterns of irrationality, inconsistency, and incompetence in the ways human beings arrive at decisions and choices when faced with uncertainty." So why is behavioral finance important? As Warren Buffett said, investing is not a game where the guy with the 160 IQ beats the guy with the 130 IQ. Once you have ordinary intelligence, what you need is the temperament to control the urges that get other people into trouble in investing. Or as Brian Jakubowski said, price and value diverge because people are emotional. That's why the distinguishing attribute among successful investors is temperament rather than brain power, experience, or classroom training. Daniel Kahneman, really sorry, it's a different presentation there than the one that I submitted. So I'll just go through the one on my laptop. Daniel Kahneman explains in Thinking Fast and Slow that humans have two different systems of thinking. System one, which operates automatically and quickly and makes instinctual and intuitive decisions. System two allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it, including complex computations involving logic, math, or statistics. So heuristics are simple rules we use via System 1 to form judgments or make decisions. Heuristics are mental shortcuts whereby we simplify a complex situation in order to jump to a quick conclusion. Most of the time, heuristics work well. If we happen to be in the jungle, we can immediately notice a shadow or, why not, sign of a possible predator. And today, in today's world, we can automatically read people's faces, drive a car on an empty road, do easy math, or understand a simple language. However, if we face a situation that requires the use of logic, math, or statistics to reach a good judgment, heuristics lead to systematic errors. These systematic errors are cognitive biases, and by some counts, there are like 200 cognitive biases, and the list keeps growing. We only have time to look at a few of the main ones, obviously. In The Black Swan, Nassim Taleb says, the narrative fallacy addresses our limited ability to look at sequences of facts without weaving an explanation into them, or equivalently forcing a logical link, an arrow of relationship upon them. Explanations bind facts together. They make them all the more easily remembered. They help them make more sense. Where this propensity can go wrong is when it increases our impression of understanding. So the narrative fallacy is central to many of the biases mentioned by Daniel Kahneman and the misjudgments discussed by Charlie Munger. The human brain, whether using intuition or logic, always looks for or creates logical coherence, especially cause and effect among random data. In our primate days, System 1 was usually right because most things back then could be explained in terms of simple cause and effect. In today's world, System 1 is often wrong when it invents causal explanations. There's a good example that Shane Parrish gives on his Farnham Street blog, the profile of a famous athlete. Let me just read this. It was clear from a young age that Stephen was destined for greatness. He was taller than his whole class, had skills that none of his peers had, and a mother who never let him indulge laziness or sloth. Losing his father at a young age pushed him to work harder than ever, knowing he'd have to support his family. And once he met someone willing to tutor him, someone like Central High basketball coach Ed Johnson, The future was all but assured. Stephen was going to be an NBA player come hell or high water. So System 1 automatically accepts this story about the causes of Stephen's success. But the question is, how many young men have a similar background as Stephen and yet fail to achieve their dreams of playing in the NBA? Probably thousands. Of course, the factors mentioned in the story about Stephen are important in explaining Stephen's success, but given the thousands of young men like Stephen who fail to play in the NBA, the explanation is clearly incomplete. What factors are missing? There could be many, including luck, timing, not getting injured. Two quick stories. I played basketball at Gonzaga for 3 years, then I played in Europe for 2 years, but something like 70% of those 5 years I was injured, and I had to stop playing because of injuries. I have a younger brother who's super talented, and he had a career-ending ankle injury. Of course, me telling these stories, I have a cognitive bias. I'm sure I'm biased, but certainly not getting injured is important if you want to make the NBA. So stories of how businesses rise and fall strike a chord with readers by offering what the human mind needs, a simple message of triumph and failure that identifies clear causes and ignores the determinative power of luck and the inevitability of regression to the mean. The writers of business case study books thought that their explanations of success would be predictive of future success, yet many of the stellar companies highlighted became shells of their former selves. Can good corporate culture help explain business success? Of course, just as height, athletic ability, and work ethic can help explain NBA success. However, we know that many tall, talented, hardworking people don't make the NBA. Similarly, there are many corporate cultures that fit the description in Built to Last that nevertheless end up failing. Business success is simply more complicated than the reductive narrative presented in Built to Last. Luck, circumstance, strategic choices, and specific individual personalities all could play a role. The danger of the narrative fallacy is that it causes us to have a simplified and often incorrect view of past causality, which makes us believe that we understand the past much better than we actually do, which makes us in turn believe we can predict the future much better than we actually can. A related bias is hindsight bias. This is the tendency after an event has occurred to see the event as having been more predictable than it actually was. Our inability to reconstruct past beliefs inevitably causes us to underestimate the extent to which we were surprised by past events. Kahneman had two students in Jerusalem, Baruch Fishoff and Ruth Beith, who conducted a survey before President Richard Nixon visited China and Russia in 1972. And the respondents assigned probabilities of 15 possible outcomes of Nixon's diplomatic initiatives. So after Nixon's return from his travels, Fishoff and Beith asked the same people to recall the probability that they had originally assigned to each of the 15 possible outcomes. The results were clear. If an event had actually occurred, people exaggerated the probability that they'd assigned to it earlier. If the possible event had not come to pass, the participants erroneously recalled that they had always considered it unlikely. So the tendency to revise the history of one's beliefs in light of what actually happened produces a robust cognitive illusion. The right way to evaluate a decision, especially when randomness is involved, is to look at the process of making the decision. If you focus on the outcome, you can have outcome bias. An agent can make a good decision but get blamed because the outcome is poor, or an agent can make a bad decision but get praised because the outcome is good. The sense-making machinery of System 1 makes us see the world as more tidy, simple, predictable, and coherent than it really is. The illusion that one has understood the past feeds the further illusion that one can predict and control the future. These illusions are comforting. They reduce the anxiety we would experience if we allowed ourselves to fully acknowledge the uncertainties of existence. We all have a need for the reassuring message that actions have appropriate consequences and that success will reward wisdom and courage. Many business books are tailor-made to satisfy this need. So overconfidence, everyone's favorite topic. There's three basic ways to define overconfidence. There's overestimation of one's actual performance or capabilities, overplacement of one's performance or capabilities relative to others, and over-precision in expressing unwarranted certainty in the accuracy of one's beliefs. Overestimation of one's actual performance, an example of that would be the planning fallacy. People consistently underestimate how long it will take to complete complicated tasks. A good example, graduate students were asked to estimate the time it would take them to finish their thesis under 3 scenarios, best case, expected, and worst case. The average guesses were 27.4 days, 33.9 days, and 48.6 days. That's for best, expected, and worst. The actual average turned out to be 55.5 days. Overplacement of one's relative performance or capabilities. We'll look at a bunch of examples on the next slide of this, but one quick example is 93% of American drivers rate themselves as better than the median. Over-precision in expressing unwarranted certainty in the accuracy of one's beliefs. If confidence is objectively accurate, then judgments with 100% confidence will be right 100% of the time. Judgments with 90% confidence will be right 90% of the time, and so forth. However, when asked to make a prediction at the 98% confidence level, people are usually right about 60 to 70% of the time. So this is always a fun one. The Lake Wobegon effect, the above average effect, is named after the fictional town of Lake Wobegon from the radio series A Prairie Home Companion, where according to Garrison Keillor, all the children are above average. So we're all familiar with this. What's interesting about this, though, is even someone like Daniel Kahneman, who has spent over 50 years studying cognitive bias, especially overconfidence, he admits that by nature he's wildly overconfident. So you have to learn to slow yourself down when you're approaching a decision that requires logic or statistics. So here's some examples of people being wildly overconfident. 19% of Americans think they belong to the richest 1% of US households. 81% of new business owners think their business has at least a 70% chance of success, but only 39% think any business like theirs would be likely to succeed. Each state in the United States reported that their state's average elementary school test score was above the national average. Every single state believed this to be true. Most students believe they are more popular than average. When high school seniors were asked about their ability to get along with others, over 99% rated themselves as above average. 60% rated themselves in the top 10%, while a full 25% rated themselves in the top 1%. 94% of university faculty rated their teaching ability as above average, while 68% rated their teaching ability in the top 25%. 87% of Stanford MBA students said their academic performance was above the median. 86% of Harvard MBA students said that they were better looking than their classmates. And finally, mutual fund managers, analysts, and business executives at a conference were asked to write down how much money they would have at retirement and how much the average person in the room would have. The average figures were $5 million and $2.6 million, respectively. This is back in 2007. The professor who asked the question said that regardless of the audience, the ratio is always about 2 to 1. And I got these last 2 examples from the value investor Whitney Tilson. Information and overconfidence. There was a study done by psychologist Paul Slovic in 1973. 8 experienced bookmakers were shown a list of 88 variables found on a typical past performance chart on a horse. Each bookmaker was asked to rank the piece of information by importance. And then the bookmakers were given data for 40 past races and asked to rank the top 5 horses in each race. Each bookmaker was given the past data in increments of the 5, 10, 20, and 40 variables he had selected as most important. So each bookmaker predicted the outcome of each race 4 times. And then for each prediction, they were asked to give a degree of confidence. So the results, the accuracy was virtually unchanged regardless of the number of variables, but confidence skyrocketed as the number of pieces of information increased. The same result has been found in a variety of areas. And by the way, there's an important lesson here for us as investors and investment analysts. Usually the investment thesis depends on a few key variables. So it's good to learn as much as you can, gather as much information as you can, but also keep in mind that usually the investment thesis depends on 3 to 5 key variables. So loss aversion, people feel the pain of a loss roughly 2 times as much as they get pleasure from an equal gain. Loss aversion often causes investors to refuse to sell at a loss. There's also the issue of ego. We don't want to sell at a loss because that means we have to admit that we made a mistake. Philip Fisher writes in Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits, more money has probably been lost by investors holding a stock they really did not want until they could at least come out even than from any other single reason. If to these actual losses are added the profits that might have been made through the proper reinvestment of these funds, if such reinvestment had been made when the mistake was first realized, the cost of self-indulgence becomes truly tremendous. Okay, confirmation bias. People tend to search for, remember, and interpret information in a way that confirms their pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. Both System 1 and System 2 automatically look for confirming evidence. Thus, the habit of always looking for disconfirming evidence, especially of our best-loved hypotheses, is arguably the most important intellectual habit we could have as investors and as seekers for wisdom and knowledge. Charles Darwin is a wonderful model for people in this regard. Darwin was far from being a genius in terms of IQ, yet Darwin trained himself always to search for facts and evidence that would contradict his hypotheses. Charlie Munger writes about this in The Psychology of Human Misjudgment. Munger writes, one of the most successful users of an antidote to first conclusion bias was Charles Darwin. He trained himself early to intensively consider any evidence tending to disconfirm any hypothesis of his, more so if he thought his hypothesis was a particularly good one. He provides a great example of psychological insight correctly used to advance some of the finest mental work ever done. Just because you make money doesn't mean it's a good decision. Just because you lose money doesn't mean it's a bad decision. A good decision follows a sound process. Consistently making good decisions eventually pays off. This is true in the field of investing. It's true in games of chance like poker and blackjack. And I suppose many of us will get to test our decision making in poker this evening. Paul Meehl was the author of Clinical versus Statistical Prediction, and Meehl compared simple statistical algorithms to human experts. And Meehl found that in most cases the algorithms were more accurate than the experts. And since Meehl's book, there have been a few hundred studies, and about 60% of the studies showed that the algorithms are clearly better than human experts. This is in a wide variety of areas. And the other 40% of the time, the algorithms are roughly the same in accuracy as the experts. But that's basically a win for the algorithms, because the algorithms are usually much less expensive to use than human experts. I mentioned that just because that's a lead into a brief discussion of quantitative value investing. Excuse me for a second. Oh, I see I'm almost out of time. I apologize, but real quickly, we all know that most active investors trail the S&P 500 index. If you apply quantitative value investing to microcap stocks, you can get about 18 to 22% a year. And the last thing I'll say real quickly, James P. O'Shaughnessy and What Works on Wall Street tested hundreds of strategies, and guess what? The top 4 best performing strategies of all time were all quantitative microcap value strategies. So microcap value is the place to be, whether you're a quantitative investor or you're analyzing each investment case one by one. Thank you very much.